Candidate for the Illinois 1st Congressional District, Steve Dejoie believes his experience as a banking professional and entrepreneur make him the best candidate for the seat held by Representative Bobby Rush for the last 30 years. He is the former owner of Dejoie's Bistro and currently works as an engagement consultant for Seaway and Sawa Financial Services, providing home ownership education and real estate investment in underserved communities. The Chicago Defender spoke with Steve Dejoie about how he would address public safety as congressman and his thoughts on what the role of a congressman is in the 1st Congressional District. What would be your plan of attack to address not just the violence, but the underlying causes of violence in our communities?
Wow, well, that's like a 5-layered question. But the first layer is, a triage approach. One of the things that the Kim Foxx and the Cook County State's Attorney has to do is prosecute these criminals with more robust criminal offenses. Calling an armed carjack a joyride, or an adolescent just having fun is a completely misaccurate description of what's really going on out there. These kids aren't joyriding and carjacking for fun. These are criminals who are taking life into their hands and murdering people over cell phones and cars. That's one thing. So we've got to find a way to address the actual criminality that's taking place. One, if you've committed violent criminal felonies and violent acts against others, meaning, not just theft, but batteries and felony assault, then there is no electronic monitoring, and there is no waiting for you to be given bail to be out to terrorize while you're on trial. So it has to be some common sense of judicial accountability. Absolutely. This whole the summer was really this past year, one of the incidents that really struck me, and which means the need for judicial responsibility is just so clear. When Kim Foxx declared that the young man killed in a knife fight, the killer would not be prosecuted because of what she termed mutual combat. And when that mutual combat negated the crime of murdering this young man, and then when the shooting happened on Milwaukee Avenue, when people were in the middle of the day, besieged by gunfire from a running gun battle by two gang factions shooting from cars, and that was not, and caught on videotape, and a man died. That wasn't charged because of what she termed mutual combat, So that's one aspect of it. It's got to be harder judicial punishment for the crimes that were out here. We all know, what good common sense judicial punishment is. It's not trying to target unfairly any black kid, but when a kid has committed violent crimes against other children and innocents in our community, there has to be repercussion. Otherwise, there's no deterrent. The thing that I really am pushing hard for is to see our young people be given opportunities to do other things other than just college. Everyone's saying, let's get our kids in college, which I think is a great idea, but also vocational training to give our kids activities and trades, to use their hands. And so I've been really pushing hard for the last 10 years or so that we open up the Dunbars of the world and the CVSs and the Dawson Skills Centers and Olive Harvey. Those programs are open and the buildings are there fully equipped. The kids aren't coming to them because they're not engaged in the community to get there. So I think we've got to do more of that. Then, as you know, last year when the carjacking hit its epidemic, although it's reached beyond epidemic now, we sat out to provide a safe period at the gas pumps in Hyde Park, Bronzeville, and the South Side. And even though it was only for 3 hours on a Saturday, what happened is the community came together and locked arms to try to protect itself. And I think that was the most effective tool. I think we've got to do that going forward this summer with the parks and the Red Line and again in the CTA. There's no reason why we can't have black men patrolling and at least standing in place at these parks like Cole Park. I mean, four guys standing on each corner of Cole Park during the peak times when the kids are playing would stop a lot of violence from happening, and it may save some lives. Now, some say, should they be paid? And that's where my plan is. CPS, the Chicago Police Department Community Camps program should be placed in the hands of neighborhood organizations, meaning not only the responsibility for the patrolling of community, but the budget that they have, because you're asking community people to get out there and volunteer when police officers are making double overtime to do the same thing and not even being out there. So I think that police overtime should be dedicated and shifted to the use by community organizations. I think caps in their budget should be given back to the community, should be given to the community, as opposed to being run by police officers. And then finally, we've got to start providing a code of conduct in our community, not because it's some power at B that says we need to save each other, but because our community needs to regain a code of conduct. The fact that women are terrorized and kids are terrorized, and if you built anything in this city and people are too scared to come out of their doors like you just described, what sense does it make to have? There's no economic development if there's no participation from the community. So it's a complex issue, but something has to be done right now. I just worry that come the hot weather that's coming up in the next week, we're going to see a proliferation of gun violence that I don't think we've ever seen before.
Well, you bring up a good point when you talk about accountability for the actions that, people, for what people do. Now, as Congressman, there's a conversation happening around social justice and equity and criminal justice reform. How do you balance the fact that that's a necessary need along with holding people accountable who terrorize neighborhoods?
Well, you know what? I've been working with law enforcement for a long time. Most of my friends are law enforcement officers, and many of them now have gotten up in age, and some of them are retiring. But we have the politicians, we have the bodies in place to make the difference that we need. It's just we've got to make sure that the leadership in these positions, we've got Tim Evans, who's head of the courts. We've got Kim Foxx, who's the state's attorney. We've got 16, 18 aldermen. We've got almost a full black city council. We've got a black Cook County board president, a black mayor. And so why is it that there's such a disconnect between the goals of the black community for safety and our politicians and those that can affect the change that we need and have that ability? So that's really why I'm running. The congressman's job is to be one of legislation and protecting the constitutional rights of the district. But I think it's more than that now. I think now it's a symbol and a beacon for a change in our community. And the congressman that I plan to be is one that's in the community, on the ground, where things are happening, providing solutions to people's everyday problems, because I think that's what's been missing for over 30 years. I've tried to work with Bobby Rush's office for many, many years. And often when you call that number, you don't get an answer. And if you do get through, you don't get a chance to speak with him. And if you invite him somewhere, he's at another event. And if you say, look, I'm at that event, he says, well, no, he's at another event. So, our politicians have got to be accessible. They got to be visible. People know you can't solve everything overnight, but you for sure can be present and stand with them in their moments of crisis.
When you kind of mentioned the kind of congressman that you want to be, how do you balance? One of the complaints we hear is that, politicians come out, they campaign, they come to black communities and churches, and once they get in office, they forget about the issues that are important to us. So how would you balance the issues that are important to the black community versus the day-to-day responsibilities that you would have as a congressman? How would you balance the two of those?
Well, that argument that you can't be everywhere at one time, that's true. But what you can do is have a great team around you. And I will develop a great team to be involved in constituent services, because, the congressional office does a lot more than just get on TV when there's an election.
Right.
They man the phones, and those phones are besieged every day with calls from everything from a passport request to someone having a problem with immigration to something as minor or something as serious as someone being deported. And those phones have to be manned, and each of those calls have to be addressed. I am very experienced at helping people and solving problems. And so I've worked in situations where, the phone rings. You don't know whether it's a simple call for a phone number or someone in dire need. And so when we get those calls, we've got to roll up our sleeves, but we've got to be present in the community. And that's the thing that's been missing for most of our elected officials. They come out when there's a crisis or, like you said, when there's an election. But I can tell you, after June 28th, I will still be out there in the community doing the things that I think are important to make the changes. I didn't start this campaign 30 days ago, and with the work that I've been doing, the work I've been doing has really been going on for the last 20 years. And certainly in the last 10 years, I really focused on providing services to people. My profession is banking, and I've done well to maintain my employment. But what I've really been excited to do is to maintain my commitment to being there when people need me in the community.
Mm-hmm. That leads me to kind of to my next question. There's been this debate of, do you need political experience to do the job as congressman? Do you find the fact that you have not held an elected office a help or a hindrance as you run for congressman?
Well, there's no class to be a congressman that you take to prepare, and there's no application process. What we hope is that people that have demonstrated through their experience in life, a commitment to serve. I think I've demonstrated that through all of my experiences, from being in the nightclub business, which was a restaurant, quote unquote. But what I think more than anything is that, I've shown that I can bring people together to solve problems, and I think that's the most important thing. I guess I've been really prepared for this job for the last 30 years because the resources that I've accumulated and the relationships that I have and maintain, are those that will serve us well as we try to make this change. So to answer your question, I think you do have to have some acumen in terms of political relationship, but there is no apprentice program for becoming a Congress. You have to show some commitment. And I think the people that are popping up now with in the last hour of this pivot, when Bobby Rushton decided to retire, are some extraordinarily capable people and from some extraordinary backgrounds. But I think at the same time, you have to ask yourself, if you've been in that same position or close to the power or close to the authority for the last 30 years, and we're in the condition we're in, it's time for some new leadership. It's time for some new ideas. And I think I represent that.
And the other thing is, like I've mentioned to some of the other candidates, this is a new Congress. This is not a very, it's not a Congress that's working well together to get things done. And what we're seeing is the GOP very united in strategically stripping away a lot of our rights, whether it's voting rights, reproductive rights, some of the rights to educate students. Going into Congress, going into that kind of divisive environment, there's a balance between having those relationships and reaching across the aisle and moments where you really have to dig your heels in and fight for what you believe in. Do you feel like you're capable of holding that fight? Because a lot of people feel like, the Democrats are always trying to reach across the aisle and nothing's getting done.
Well, I'm a fighter by nature, and I've always fought for what I think is the right causes and the right side of being on the right side of history. I think so many people are looking to go to Washington to get along. I'm not going to Washington to get along. I'm going to Washington to get things done. The effort that I plan to put in is not about being invited to the little cliques in Washington, if that's the proper term. Mm-hmm. I want to be back in the community, bringing solutions back to our district. Because if it works in the first district, it works in the city of Chicago, Illinois, and around the country. So I just really view it as an opportunity to bring our community together and our resources together. As far as the Republicans are concerned, I think it's time to get beyond the Democrat-Republican argument and get to the American argument. Once you're elected, you're no longer a Republican congressman or a Democratic congressman in my eyes. You're an American congressman, and you represent all of America. And that's what we've got to get back to the message of this country. If there's so much factionalism right now in terms of, Black, brown, Asian. We've got to bring all of our organizations and communities together, because if it works for all of us, it works for one of us, it works for all of us. And so that's my plan.
Mm. Do you think that's possible with this kind of Congress that we're in now?
Well, I believe people will come together. I definitely as I travel through the first district and through the city, I go to a lot of places, and I go into grocery stores and restaurants, and I see the hope that people have to really come together. It's a myth that everyone is divided. I think it's more of a myth that everyone hates each other. I think people really generally care for each other. We just got to find ways to connect the dots and bring people together under the same. But we can be different. We can have different likes in terms of music and culture, and certainly the Black community is not monolithic.
Right.
But we have to be able to respect the differences of each other and have to understand that even as Black people, the differences that we have, we've got to overcome. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing I think we need to do is Black folks need to come together and realize that there is a problem with the way we are treating each other in our community. And that's the first problem that we've got to solve before we can ask the system to treat us better. We've got to treat ourselves better.
Mhm. And was there anything else that you think is important that our readers know about who you are and why you want to be the next congressman?
Well, you know what? I loved my mother. And, my mother was a teacher. She was a scholar. She was a chef. And the attack on women's rights, and especially the reproductive issue right now, it's a tragedy, and it's an American hypocrisy. The fact that you're going to, restrict abortion, and no woman wants an abortion under any circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't give women options in terms of if they bring a child into this world, then what do we expect them to do when they don't have any other option other than to try to, use reproductive rights? And the fact that that they're trying to restrict them to the level where it's going to really be the burden of restriction on lower income women and women that don't have the ability to travel. It's just shocking. I can tell you that, I know several women, and just recently shared a story with me of going to an hotel and right on the South Side in the 70s to meet a man who was supposed to schedule an abortion in a hotel room without the sanitation or medical certificates. And that was the game plan for most women back in the 70s. We
Right.
can't go back there. We cannot go back there. The other thing is that for the Voting Rights Act and the George Floyd criminal crime bill, it's shocking that here 2 years later after George Floyd murder and 20 or 30 more along the same lines, we are still fighting for the George Floyd crime bill. And the fact that our voting rights are now being challenged in every state. And all we seem to be doing is watching BET and these different movies on television while our rights are being stripped away from us. So we can't be distracted by what we see in the media and, what we think is our focus, which seems to be our music and our movies and our sports, when our politics are really changing the way that we're going to be viewed in the future going forward for the next 100 years. So we've got to do something. We've got to do it now.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for talking to the Chicago Defender.
And I'll tell you one thing: the Defender has got to be maintained as the voice of the Chicago and the voice of Black America, because the history of the Defender. Oh my God! My mom was a great friend of John Sinstack, and I can tell you, without the Defender, what would we have?
Right.
So I appreciate you all asking me to be a part of this.
The Illinois primary is June 28th, 2022, with the general election happening on November 8th, 2022. The Chicago Defender encourages all readers to register and vote in the primary and general elections. For more on Steve Dejoie, visit his website at www.dejoieforcongress.com. This is Danielle Sanders reporting for the Chicago Defender.